I got out like a few months after I started doing stand-up.
Drew Carey spent decades making America laugh, but behind the smile was a man who secretly battled depression, survived 2 suicide attempts, and lost the woman he still loved in one of Hollywood's most horrifying tragedies. In 2025, he finally revealed the truth, and it changes the way you see him forever. For more than 17 years, Drew Carey stood under the bright lights of The Price is Right, smiling like everything in life had worked out perfectly. Millions of people saw him as funny, stable, and impossible to break. But behind that familiar smile was a man carrying decades of pain, childhood trauma, depression, 2 suicide attempts, and a heartbreak so devastating it nearly destroyed him. In 2025, Drew finally stopped hiding the truth. And once you hear what he survived, you will never look at him the same way again. Drew Carey spent decades making millions of people laugh, but behind the smile was a life shaped by pain, depression, and loss. In early 2025, after years of silence, he finally opened up about the darkest parts of his past. The beloved host of The Price is Right admitted that long before fame, he had attempted suicide twice and struggled with emotional wounds that followed him throughout his life. For many fans, it was shocking. The cheerful television personality they had watched for years had once come dangerously close to disappearing forever. Born on May 23, 1958, in Cleveland, Drew Carey grew up in a working-class neighborhood. His childhood changed forever when his father died from a brain tumor, while Drew was only 8 years old. The loss left a deep mark on him. Years later, Carey admitted that most of his memories of his father were connected to illness, making the grief even harder to process. His mother suddenly had to raise 3 boys alone, and life became financially and emotionally difficult. As he grew older, depression quietly took hold. In his memoir, Dirty Jokes and Beer, Stories of the Unrefined, Carey revealed another painful secret. He said he had been sexually abused by a family member as a child, something he kept buried for years before finally speaking about it publicly. By the age of 18, the pain became overwhelming enough that he attempted suicide for the first time. He later admitted he tried again in his early 20s, describing himself as angry and empty while everyone around him seemed happy. But his story did not end there. In 1980, Carey joined the United States Marine Corps Reserve, where he served for 6 years and reached the rank of sergeant. The Marines gave him something his life had been missing: structure, discipline, and purpose. That stability became the foundation for the next chapter of his life. During those years, Carey discovered comedy. He began writing jokes for Cleveland radio host David Lawrence, who encouraged him to keep going. Carey studied joke books, worked tirelessly on material, and slowly built confidence as a stand-up comedian. In 1986, he won an open mic contest that helped launch his career. From there, he spent years grinding through comedy clubs before finally getting his big break in 1991. That year changed everything. Carey appeared on HBO's Young Comedians special and later performed on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. His set impressed Johnny Carson so much that Carson invited him to sit on the couch afterward, a legendary moment for any comedian. Overnight, Carey went from struggling comic to nationally recognized performer. Hollywood quickly noticed him. In 1995, he co-created and starred in The Drew Carey Show, a sitcom inspired by his own life in Cleveland. The show became a major success, running for 9 seasons and turning Carey into one of television's biggest stars. At the same time, he hosted Whose Line Is It Anyway?, proving he could dominate both scripted comedy and improvisation. By the early 2000s, Carey had become one of the most recognizable entertainers in America. In 2007, he accepted perhaps the hardest job in television, replacing Bob Barker as host of The Price is Right. Many viewers doubted anyone could fill Barker's shoes after 35 years, but Carey slowly earned the audience's trust. By 2025, he had hosted the show for more than 17 years, surviving in a role many believed impossible to inherit. Yet even while his career thrived, private battles continued. In 2010, Carey was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Doctors warned him that unless he changed his lifestyle, his health would continue to decline. The warning became a turning point. Carey completely transformed his routine, losing around 80 pounds through strict dieting and exercise. Eventually, he no longer needed diabetes medication. Still, the greatest emotional blow of his life was yet to come. In 2017, Carey met therapist and author Amy Harwick. Their relationship moved quickly, and by early 2018 they were engaged. Carey openly described himself as deeply in love with her. But later that same year the engagement ended. Then in February 2020 tragedy struck. Harwick was murdered in her Hollywood Hills home after an alleged attack by an ex-boyfriend. Just 2 days before her death, she and Carey exchanged emotional messages about forgiveness and reconnecting. Carey replied with 3 simple words. "I love you." Those became some of the last words they ever shared. The loss devastated him. Carey publicly admitted he was overwhelmed with grief, describing their relationship as the kind of love people only experience once in a lifetime. For someone who had already spent decades fighting depression behind the scenes, the tragedy reopened old emotional wounds. By early 2025, Carey finally began speaking more openly about his mental health struggles. He explained that comedy had never been just a career. Humor, he said, became a way to survive darkness. The jokes, television shows, and game show smiles were not only entertainment. They were part of how he kept himself alive. That is what makes Drew Carey's story so powerful. Behind the laughter was a man shaped by loss, trauma, heartbreak, and survival. Yet somehow, through discipline, humor, and relentless effort, he kept rebuilding himself again and again. Drew Carey's story was never just about comedy, television, or fame. It was about survival. Behind the laughter was a man fighting battles most people never saw, and somehow he kept showing up anyway. Maybe that's why his story hits so hard. Because it reminds us that even the people who make the world smile can be carrying unimaginable pain behind closed doors. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who quietly refuse to give up.